Hey, hello. Welcome to the stream. Just checking my levels here. Getting settled in here at my drawing desk. I spent the day cleaning the apartment, so I don't know if this cumbia music is a little too loud. Drop it down a notch. I think what I actually want to do is, well, I don't quite know how to fix this live, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to let it play. Right, welcome to the stream. I'm Connor, Sites-Bowen, here in Pittsburgh, and it is, Saturday, April 18th. It's about 5 p.m. You might be asking, oh, how did he figure out how to write sideways like this? Well, necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. Is that how you spell Saturday? No, I can't spell sideways, apparently. Saturday. Right, well, it's because if I turn my notebook this way, it's like 18 inches wide, and so it kind of like presses into my belly, and I have to really like fully extend my arm because this thing's, oh no, it's not 18 inches wide, it's like 22 inches wide. Yeah, anyway, it's tough. Well, whatever. I turned it sideways to demonstrate, so I'm going to just finish this out. I could have done this beforehand, but I am doing it now, and I'm going to at least talk you guys through it and tell you guys why, so it's instructional. The reason that I sign and date everything is because, well, I sign and date everything. It's a habit that I was sort of raised. I am adjusting this volume now. Where is, like, the mixer? Alright. This was something that was easier in the past, but which has maybe gotten worse. Oh, you know what I can do? This is coming out of real-world speakers. I'll turn the speakers down. There we go. Alright. Right, I don't know why the speakers were at max volume. But, you sign and date everything. And the reason is, it took me a long time. I thought that there was some outside agent that I was pleasing by signing and dating everything, right? I thought that the life police were going to arrive at some point and just, hound me for not signing and dating everything. Well, it turns out that the life police is you in the future. So if you, and I'm pointing up at the camera at you right here, and I'm sorry it's not focusing. I see why everyone's just like complaining about the cameras constantly on YouTube. I don't know whether that's like a faux pas on the YouTuber's part, or just the nature of the technology, or what, but it's the world we live in, apparently. Yeah, I'm just throwing some light on, see if that helps. Right, I'm just gonna start drawing while I'm talking. You sign and date everything, and the reason is, it's cool to keep notes, right? Like, it's a good habit to write things down. But, and this is my contention is that those notes need metadata, or else they're just garbage, you know. If you have a note that says, I was floating through rock, and then I was floating in a lightless ocean, and then I was hanging out with some whales, but I could just hear them, but I could make whale noises with my feet. That is like a useful note if it's kind of like got a time and a date, and if you also say like, this was a dream I had, then that's cool, right? Like that's a little dream journal. But if you just have a note that says floating in rock, and you come on that 8 months later, out of context, no reconstruction, you'll throw it away, right? And you'll lose that whole experience, that dream that you had, everything you were trying to remind yourself of in the future, doesn't make sense without time and date. So, you know, like, just as a favor to future you, and as, I don't know if you're egotistical like I think my internal critic claims me to be, and which I think I am sometimes, not monomaniacal. Well, I guess all monomaniacal people say, oh, I'm not monomaniacal. But in any case, I like to think that someone's going to review this, whether it's like grandkids or just someone interested in how the early 21st century reflected on itself at the dawn of whatever age we're dawning into right now. You know, I think part of this is about legacy. Maybe not legacy, big grand legacy, but just having a body of work out there. It's. I would like the future to have a copy of a couple hours of my speaking voice, because I think that my writing makes a lot more sense when you've heard me speak. I think that the way I tell stories is uniquely entertaining. Yeah, I do have a little bit of an ego. Absolutely. So, yes, please document me. Oh, okay. That was an abrupt musical shift. This is kind of, we're just free ranging here on the Free Music Archive. I clicked on their international tab, and we're diving into cumbia within the Latin America section, which is like dancehall music, but it's dancehall music that's typically based on rhythms that are much older than the dance halls, and which most songs often have someone going cumbia sort of loudly in them, and otherwise they're just decent techno, and kind of a good background jam. And I like the music a lot because the percussion is not Western, it's Latin American, and because the tonality is different than what you hear here. And I like that. The same way that I'm always good for an oud, the Arabic instrument. I love a good oud when I hear one, kind of like strange drumming thing. Pan drum, basically. Is that what an oud is? I'm trying to do too many things at once. Anyway, yeah, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of cumbia. I like the kind of headspace that it puts me in. And I like that the rhythm, it's a very driving rhythm that feels, well, it's got this complexity to it that a lot of Celtic music has, where it's basically just like a reel, and it's expressing some kind of like bit flipping binary operation musically as like, you know, like 0, 1, 1, 0, 1. We keep adding ones into this, and what ends up happening is you end up just pushing the lead 1 over, but only as quickly as the math works out. I don't know if you guys have ever counted in binary. It's been a long time since I've counted in binary. But the, where am I going with that? I don't know. That metaphor will come back to me. Oh, right. Yeah. So, like, if this cache is only 4 bytes big, then after this, it flips back over to 0. Right? So there's only 8 states, and then it progresses through them, and then it flips over. And so what this music does is it, like, makes sure that it goes through all of these. And that's something that occurs a lot in Celtic music, and it's also something that I think is found at least a little bit in cumbia, that there's this progression that is kind of determined by the couple of chorus rounds at the beginning of the song, and then they just play out across the like 2 or 3 keys that they're supposed to play out. They start in B, and then they go up, and then they come back down, and then they end, 1 octave lower than wherever they were. So that's not the COVID. That's just throat clearing. What am I doing here? Well, this is like a warm-up exercise. I was thinking about the flowers that I was drawing, or the ferns that I was drawing, last time we were together on the stream, which was 2 days ago, and I was trying to see what I could remember of the kind of grammar that these plants have that we worked out while we were figuring out how to draw them in the first half of the stream 2 days ago. Because I would like to... right, so what I'm doing now is I just started drawing them based on how I remembered what we learned, and so I'm trying to do this, and I haven't looked at what we did 2 days ago since then, so there's some amount of this. Oh, and I know that this is reminding me of something that we learned, which I don't know if I did it consistently over here, but now that I'm paying a little bit more attention, let's see. Right. So this stalk is coming back to me, right? The stalk, that defines the breadth of the thing, the arc of the thing. And then, when I say thing, I mean frond. These are each fronds. Fronds. And then these are pinae. Pina? Someone should type in the chat and correct me if anybody's listening on what the pronunciation of pina is. Maybe not the IPA pronunciation, but sort of rhymes with would probably be fine. Pina rhymes with Mina. I guess like Mina Harker. The Bride, and I think maybe Bride of Dracula after Jonathan Harker. Oh no, it's not Poor Mina, right? Poor Mina is saved, I believe, by the end of the thing, by the end of the novel. It is her friend. Can't remember the friend's name. He'll come to me in a while. The Dracula story has been told and retold and told and retold. Ever since college. Before that, I mean, I've always been a fan of literary works of horror, horror fiction, and so, and the macabre. Uh, I remember I had like a Poe, an Edgar Allan Poe uh, poetry book when I was young, just a collection of his poems with I think maybe a plate illustration uh, at the front of each one. Uh, that book might have been from the 30s or 40s, maybe even 50s. I think that the things that we think of as heirlooms sometimes actually turn out to be from like real but very unhip times compared to the times you imagine that they came from. There's a lot of tinsel trees that people imagine are from a 60s childhood, but I think that they were actually kind of 60s nostalgia items purchased in the heyday of the 80s. And people have kind of, uh, well, you just don't think of that stuff as having happened in the 80s. But no, that was when it was really cheap and ubiquitous and everyone could afford one. Finally we're liberated from the yearly tree man hassle of messing up the car roof, driving 2 towns over to the newly built mall or whatever new things are happening. I guess it's kind of cheating for the purpose of this warm-up experiment where I'm trying to remember how we drew these yesterday, how I drew these yesterday. To have the image up on the screen there of this drawing of a fern. Alright, I think that this is getting pretty close to where we were at. The fronds, you have like a diamond pattern, but one thing that you guys should note, right, and this is just a product of how ferns work, is that their structure is that they're basically like a big sort of upside down celery plant. The stem has like a curvature to it, like a saddle shape to it that keeps it rigid, the way that the saddle shape in tape measure lets it go out a certain distance and kind of bend before finally breaking off. And then these blades, and ferns get called. There's a blade fern or sword fern. Is actually a type of fern, but I think it's also just a general term for sort of sword-shaped ferns. The reason for this diamond shape is because there's this gradual uncoiling as the fiddlehead uncoils into the fern that runs this nice kind of fractal pattern that forms this sword shape where these guys, like, it reaches a maximum length and then actually kind of comes back from that a little bit, forming the bottom of the diamond. But then there's this, like, pleasing, almost geometric, kind of, like, sharp curve that lines up with this middle blade. But each of these pinnae, the lengths of them, it's determined as they're growing and is related to how far up the stem they are. That's the cool fractal thing about ferns. They come in pairs. They come off of this, either one and then the other, one and then the other. I can't quite remember whether they were paired or just alternating, but they're relatively matched. And we'll check in a sec with the last stream just to verify that what we've learned is real. So this is frond. These little guys are pinnae. Pinnae. There might be like an I in there. This is some crazy Latin. Yeah. I think that's all we were doing yesterday, or 2 days ago. I'm going to draw one more fern, and that's going to be maybe the toughest one. It was the last kind that we drew yesterday, or 2 days ago. I think because I made that mistake just a second ago, I'm real liable to make it again. That happens sometimes. I get stuck on the same error will plague me over and over because the error is what I remember, not the fix, and that's an issue worth correcting. Part of why I'm doing these streams, and it's interesting that this one's so confessional. I knew that the confessional nature of this would do its thing at some point, but I didn't know it would start today. But part of the, well, it's maybe not even confessional, it's just behind the scenes. Part of the reason that I am trying to do these is because I want to make more podcasts. I made a series of podcasts back in 2017, and I really liked creating them. And since I created them, going back and listening to them, they are very much products of the moments that they occurred during, and they really capture who I was hanging out with, what I was thinking about, and kind of where I was at right during that time in a way that I don't think pictures does, and I don't think a calendar would do. So that was really interesting, and I'd like to do that more. I'd also like to eventually have a podcast that has a co-host. I'd like to have an ongoing discussion with someone. I think that would be remotely. I think that would be cool. Right, so this is the final one, which I think was the final one we did there yesterday, where there's just no detail at all except kind of these frond, just the pinnae, no outlining to make it kind of cartoon-like, no frond stems, nothing, just this is a fern. Cool, so we'll see how we did. Let's see. Oh, right. I didn't even go as far as I thought I would. So these were our test ferns that we tried out. I didn't even get to where we got at the end of this here, right, where this one's just doesn't even have directionality the way this one does. Interesting. Well, so I feel like this has gotten busy enough and conveyed what I want to convey. I think that it might need a couple more things, but I'm going to focus on doing the steel on the other side here, and then I'm going to pull this in digitally and kind of like put it together, and once I've got a digital version of it, I think I'll have a better idea of if this needs more or if this is actually like too busy, right? I might need to, I feel like I maybe made a mistake not doing these two on their own sheets, because now, in case this turns out to have been an error in judgment, I'm going to have to go in by hand and disentangle these two from each other. I tried to keep them pretty separate, but I feel like maybe at the end of the video you guys might have seen it. I went in here and kind of added even more underlay, which is like, oh, no, I've really, right, these might turn out to be real cursed ferns, but we don't know yet. We don't know yet, so can't worry about it. Alright. So one thing I know for sure is that this stone base is going to stay the same on this side as well. There might be, and this is the next thing that we're going to have to think about, we might jump back to the drawing on my sketchbook here and kind of sketch out our thoughts before we jump into the final drawing. But I'd like to get some square inches done on the final drawing, regardless of how much kind of experiment and insight we get on the sketchbook page. So I'm going to do this right now. And when I say square inches, I really do think about this work, and in times where I've had to be in real production mode about this work, I think about it in terms of square inches, right? That a particular kind of drawing is going to take a certain number of square inches to accomplish, and I know I have kind of rough ideas and guidelines within my own mind about how long it takes me to do square inches. A couple years ago, it took me a good half hour to do a square inch, which meant that I could do 2 square inches per hour, which meant that, well, that was really slow. Now, obviously, it's sped up quite a lot. I've also learned some techniques and tricks to speed it up. One thing for sure is that if there's only really 5 kinds of gray values, if there's kind of black, white, a middle gray, a very light gray, and a dark gray, and those are the 3 values, regardless of how I achieve them with the pen. If there's only kind of 5 values, a 5-value scale that is easily read by the eye, and I think that that's probably true. That 5-value number is a number that comes out of the watercolor tradition, but I've also seen it in sort of graphic artist guides, even Edward Tufte, right? Like, you want gradations that are just enough to let the human eye notice them, but they don't actually need to be more than that. You can have a really soft and unified color palette and convey a lot of information just with grayscale. Here, I'm manipulating a sense of color and a sense of value or hue, how gray or white each of these square inches is perceived as being, by varying the density of this pattern, right? I could draw lots of overlapping circles so close that they form a real density to them. And that was, what, 20? Let's call it about 20 circles. That's 10, you know, and that takes up more area, fewer circles, right? And then if we have some other space over here that just has five, you know, and then over here 1, and then maybe another one pretty distant. You can see that this moves from dark to light. So, this is kind of a field of texture that has a certain hue, and I'm trying to make sure that its hue is consistent side to side. Right. So, on the front here, this thing has these side ports at the ends, where nominally, when you line these guys up, they kind of like connect side to side and air can flow through them. And then also they have these water spouts here, where water can drain out of the systems. I imagine these as being kind of cement cisterns. I think that we did a drawing of them a while ago. Did we? Yeah, here we go. This is our kind of template, right? And this is the exit pipes. This is how they look from the side. This is how they look from the top. This is the corrugated steel that we're going to put on the back here. Back here, we got these pina. Oh yeah, hey, there's an extra N there. We can fix that right now. P-I-N-N-A. The plural is pine. Right, okay, cool. Well, that's great. So, do we need to put anything on this side? You know, I don't think we do. And this is maybe I'm being overly cautious here. And maybe I'm not, but, I've noticed that I have a tendency to do a little bit too much, to maybe put down one too many layers, and to maybe keep things a little bit too busy, right? And I forget that for verisimilitude and also just because it looks good visually, there have to be parts of the surface that aren't interesting so that the interesting parts get really noticed and become the focus of your view. And so sometimes there aren't any ports or anything sometimes. And that makes sense, right? If this is kind of an industrially designed fern tank, having all of the stuff for adjusting it being on this front part, having all of the things that need cleaned being, accessible to the rest of the room, and having the ports be like in these walls that are kind of stuck right to each other, that all makes sense. I think that that's a really good design. And having a backside that, this might be up against a wall, or this might be up against another one of these kind of back to back. But the intent is that this front side is the side that faces where work is happening, and the backside doesn't need to. The backside can just be kind of a barrier. And it's important that those barriers are steel because the processes, the reason that these fern walls exist, in addition to the kind of air purifying nature of the ferns, which is important when you're doing all kinds of big industrial ore melting and steel making, to clean that air because, it's toxic if you don't. Kind of no matter what you do. And rather than vent it, you might as well clean it at the source. And then figure out better ways to dispose of the, to find a use for the weird carcinogenic compounds that are in fly ash and all of that stuff. So these ferns kind of presuppose that what they're doing is they're being carbon sinks and pollution sinks deliberately, right? Like all of these ferns are eventually going to kind of die of poison, if not old age. Maybe they're special ferns that have been adapted to this and they relish the stuff that they pull out of the air. But yeah, certainly the reason that they're in these cases is because after this case kind of fills up with ferns and dead ferns and becomes mostly like contaminated self-made soil, then they'll go into a secondary process where the stuff that these have filtered out of the air will get itself extracted from the cases. One of the ideas that I'm trying to promulgate through the factory floor and through what these newts are building underground is this kind of permaculture utopia-like sentiment, and I think that's part of it. So you might be asking, hey, why did I go ahead and put these extra dots here going under the fold? That's just so that when this whole thing does fold together, that might look really nice. It might come out pleasing as it goes underneath this. That will blend in nicely even as the edge kind of bends down over it. I'm always trying to learn, I'm always trying to experiment. I feel a little bit sometimes like the stuff that I did first got the worst treatment because everything's a guinea pig. You know, there's no part of this process that isn't a learning process for me. This is a lot of kind of professional art making that I've spent a decade learning how to do and how to help other people do, but which now I'm implementing for myself because I have the chance to, so I'm going to do it. Yeah, so now we got to draw some Cor-10 steel. I'm going to pull up some pictures of that. Not Cor-10 steel, corrugated steel roofing. Oh, right. Oh, God. Oh, that was nothing. Will this work? Hey, wow. Okay, cool. Got it. Got it. Yeah, I guess that there's more preparation that I could have done um, for this stream that I did not do, which I'm doing now live, and you guys are learning about it as fast as I am. Other things I want to get out of doing this live stream. I intend to, right. I intend to podcast, and so this is all training for that. But part of that training is vocal training. I am speaking as consciously as I can while also drawing, and while I'm speaking and drawing, I'm trying to say likes and ums as little as possible. I am not always successful about that, but I'm trying, and I think that it is going okay. Now I'm definitely kind of triple tasking, and it's a little bit too much, but I think you guys are going to be happy with what happens. So apologies that this is just kind of a boring stream right now, but I don't want to draw without reference, and I I think you guys will really like these references. Hey, it worked. And it worked relatively seamlessly from your guys' perspective. Wonderful. Great. Okay, these are all photographs that I've taken around my neighborhood. And what they are, almost all photographs of, are different kinds of corrugated, galvanized, or both, metal, usually steel, siding, and also roofing. This is some incredible material. And when it's 100 years old, the way that some of this stuff is, it gets a real incredible patina on it. You know, this stuff was all shiny silver metal when it was all installed. It was flashy and gaudy, and since then it has rusted and rusted and rusted and rusted and had rust thrown upon it, and had graffiti thrown upon it too. You know, and some of it is just absolutely black with rust. And some of it's not. But it's all oxidized in its own way, and it's all just like awesome. So this is the material that we're going to try to recreate on this bottom half here. Let's talk about how this material works. When you think about like a big steel shed in a town like Pittsburgh, like one of these guys, this, if you believe it or not, is actually a fence, which I find hilarious. Right, so if you are looking at one of these sheds in Pittsburgh, what you find is that what these buildings tend to be is a steel superstructure. That steel superstructure gives the building its length and its width, and that steel superstructure exists in order to host a building-long movable crane platform. Hook here, and this crane platform is on little rails up at the top, or it's actually on like the platform has an axle that it's dangling from. There's a loud motorcycle outside that you guys might hear. It has an axle that it's dangling from. There's a layer of ball bearings around the axle. Or not, no, this is directly connected to it, right? So there's not ball bearings. Because this is how it moves. The ball bearings are on the internal side. Right, yeah, or I guess you could do it with bearings on this part. Either way, yeah. The point is, yeah, you'd have to do it with bearings on this part because this is carrying all the weight. Yeah, and then you have kind of like a toothed tramway that goes the length of the building. Platforms here. Another one here. Another cog here. My quick cog sketching skills are terrible. They always end up turning into stars instead of cogs. Right. Yeah, and then you have a matching set on the far side, so that's here. That is installed along this track and along this track here, and so this whole thing can move back and forth. And then you build this kind of like reinforcing membrane around the whole thing with more I-beams. Oh wow, that guy's really proving his speed here. Right, so then you kind of like fence in the crane. Why do you have this big crane here? Well, this shed is being built to house heavy manufacturing, and heavy manufacturing means moving giant heavy machines. So the reason that you have this thing here is because this thing is rated to move something like 200,000 pounds, right? Which means that you can forge something that weighs 190,000 pounds of steel in this facility and then lift it, like out or onto a thing that's going to move it out. So what you'll also often see is that if there's like a door at one end of these sheds, you will actually see train tracks going right into the shed. So there's, and it's not like often with these factories, the same work was being done day in and day out, right? It might be done a little bit differently, but like the big machines would kind of stay in place for 50 years or 100 years, maybe less if the technology changed. But you'd lay it out, and then hopefully, if your accountants were in charge, hopefully you would never lay it out again. But that gets into kind of factory management, and that's an entire piece of like global business that is what people go to school to learn how to do. And we'll probably get into that in later streams, but for now, we're focusing on how the building's built. Right. So this building contains like a value-adding process that has a giant machine. And so I'm just going to draw this big box and call this the machine. And this used to be referred to as kind of like monolithic factory design. And if you have a machine that is, for example, like a batch process, that is absolutely a monolithic design, or it can be a monolithic design because the tempo of the rest of the factory process before and after the machine occurs is totally determined by kind of like how many cookies fit in the oven, Right, and so there's like an input, and then there's a machine, and then there's an output, right? And all of these buildings, always, right? Every time you see a factory, there's a place where stuff comes in. Often it's the same door that stuff goes out, but there's a place where material comes in. There's a factory process, a machine or a series of machines that take that physical stuff and manipulate it in one way or another, expending energy or not, removing stuff from it or not, but changing it in some way in the machine and then sending it back out from the building. The reason that these buildings exist is to protect these processes and these machines from the outside world. They don't exist to protect the people in them from the outside world. That's kind of secondary. They don't exist to, because they are someone's home. They're not anything more than a concrete pad that has been fenced in by fences that make it look like it's a big house and not just like a crane with I-beams that has kind of like some stuff taped up around the edge. And at scale, when, you need to construct 100 of these buildings because that's how big your steel empire is going to be, you really do think of this building as just a skin. You think of this material as just a skin. And so what this material actually is, and you can see in the way that it's constructed here, in order to have the water that comes off the roof not slide behind the sort of sheeting that's on this side, they've just put single members of the sheeting material sideways down, folded down over from the roof line in order to keep that water off. Well, this is actually, this thing right here is the baseline material for what these roofs are made out of. It is a sheet of corrugated steel that is maybe 10 feet long. You know, it's definitely it's at least 3 meters. Well, it's definitely 2.5 meters, and it might be as much as 3 meters. You know, it's definitely 8 or more feet, and it's probably, I think, closer to 10. And then the grain of the thing goes this way. And it's like 3 feet, maybe 2.5 wide, maybe less than that. So less than a meter for, let's call it 0.8 meters. Yeah. And I don't know how clear it is from the picture there, but the whole entire side of the building here is just made out of those corrugated panels. I think they started at the bottom and they worked their way up and just overlapped them like giant shingles, right? And so the entire building side is just shingles with overlap, and then above them more shingles with more overlap. Or well, I guess you do that. Right, yeah, sorry. The shingles above them are overlapping like that. Sorry, we're drawing them in reverse of how they've been put down. So they started at the bottom and worked their way up in order to have the overlaps go up. But the way that we have to draw them is overlap first, under one underneath. And so we're drawing them actually kind of backwards to how they were constructed. And then each one of these has these corrugations. And then in addition to that, when you look real close, and now we're down in just like crazy pixel land. I'm down in crazy pixel land too. It's not just you guys. This is a little bit hard to see, but this repeated pattern right here, those are bolts, right? So that is like a bolt, a bolt, a bolt. Either bolts or tack welds or some other way. I mean, tack welds doesn't make sense, but I think that they're bolts or rivets, but they're kind of connecting the material to the rest of itself and to the steel superstructure. And that's what holds these things in. You know, there might be kind of an I-beam behind this, and then each one of these has like a bolt going into it, and then another I-beam here. But often in this kind of building, what you'll see is you'll just see, you know, a workman had this one kind of material with this one dimension and encountered a problem and said, the way that we solve this is by doing it with this material here. And so there's an architecture to the building that is entirely about how long the material is. You know, I don't think that they made this taller. I think that this roof line just goes up to the top of the 3rd or 4th layer of these, however tall it is. That might not be the case. That might be an overreach in my head, but it's all just the same stuff. You know, the same roofing material. It's all metal. It all is designed to weather, and this rust means that it's sort of weather-proof now that it's rusted. Presumably these don't end up having holes form in them over time, but I think over like 1,000 years they will eventually kind of rust away down to nothing. But yeah, this is the look. So this is what we're going to try to mimic for the back of these ferns. There's a question about how to approach this, which we can think about now if we want to. We're looking at these ferns, and we're looking at them from the front here. And at scale, this is 1 inch is 5 feet. So these ferns are 15 feet tall. Right? These are super ferns. We're drawing giant ferns. And at the scale of one of these little monster guys, 15 feet's not that bad. This is like an epic dinosaur man who's huge, and he's supposed to be 10 feet tall. So he's at an appropriate height. He's got what he's got going on. A little Warhammer lizard man here down at this sort of 1 inch equals 5 feet. 5 foot level, which is about where the sort of salamander newt species is. They're medium-sized creatures, but they're small and sort of light-boned. These are big boys. Yeah, I guess this would be like a hobgoblin. This would be like a goblin if you were thinking about goblinoids. At this scale, this is 15 feet, which means that we could pursue this side as, I think when I was originally thinking about it, I was thinking about one big sheet. I was imagining that sheet to be closer to our scale than accurate to this scale. But now that I'm thinking about it, each one of these could be a panel, right? And that would be appropriate to scale. And so at that scale, we can actually really kind of accomplish the weathering that is achieved on one of these sets of panels. And that seems like a pretty interesting goal. Because reproducing this straight line thing, that's easy. You just do that with a ruler, But reproducing the way that the material's repetitive nature has meshed with the natural patina of rainwater dripping off the roof, and weather over time is just totally fascinating. And that's what I want to capture in drawing, so that's what I think we got to think about. So let's see if we can narrow down what we want to do, what we want to draw, the patina that we want to try to capture on this side. I like this. This is a wooden barn, I think. Oh gosh. Gotta get used to the controls. Oh, no, it's not wooden, but it's definitely different because you can see the bend there, right? Like, it's not broken, it's just, bent out of shape. But it's a different kind of galvanized steel. That's the door. Yeah, oh yeah, it's got these long runs. I think that this is not the correct look for us to capture. This is steel that's been painted, and now the paint is really coming apart. But up here you can see older stuff is still going strong. I think I like this best. I think we should go for this here. This. 6:05. Wow, okay, we've already been going for an hour. I am gonna take a little break. Um, I'm gonna just take a little pause and I'll make some more coffee and kind of, I think eat one of these cookies. This is an Oreo cookie. I don't know if that is in the camera view. Whatever, yeah. This is not sponsored by Oreos. Right, yeah, so, I'm gonna take a little break, and, let's change the properties here. At 6:15 p.m. Cool. Yeah, so I'm gonna leave this going, and I'm gonna be back, in a couple minutes. I'm just gonna take a quick break. Hey, alright, we're back. So, we're going to draw this rusty stuff down here. How do we draw rusty panels? If we were drawing kind of an idealized version of this material at a distance, this would be kind of the Gearbox software version of this, the Borderlands style. Everything's got an outline. This would be a very dark and messy piece of corrugated steel at a distance. It would be hard to add more rust, right? Nice closer one. This is all testing too. We're on our testing page. That's what sketchbooks are for. Okay, so now it kind of looks like this one is relatively uniform. This one's got some texture. Here, as we get even closer to the material, we start to be showing its own kind of pattern sometimes, its own texture. So can we just emphasize the rust? I mean, at a very big level, I think when you get too close, we really would need to start trying a different tactic, having to impart value with hatching or cross-hatching, like I'm doing here, or by really increasing the dots, really showing some kind of intense texture that underlies the rust. But at a distance, looking at just how this building is, it's almost just these parallel lines that seem to be making a lot of these textures, and being kind of sensitive to whether these parallel lines are highlights or shadows. I think helps. Alright, this is starting to look interesting. This is kind of a shortened view of how these guys would go. And actually it's the ones above them that are determining how that goes. And it's these seams where there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. Because there's a lot of rust on this upper one, and just much, much less below. Not sold. I think this is another method which might be worth trying. It's not quite accurate to how these patches of rust really do form, because they don't have a strong outline. They just form. And they're sort of uniform up until their edges, and then at the edge they just quit, and it becomes this other color. And so, just the outlines is maybe not appropriate. But maybe at a smaller scale that is appropriate. Maybe that works better, but try. Okay, so here what I'm doing is I'm trying to be pretty light in my pen work outside of where these patches are, and then in the patches stay very dark. Alright, that's an interesting effect, and that's getting us closer to what we want. I like it better than this. It seems... It still feels a little bit messy, and I think what feels messy about it is that the verticality kind of screws up. We're getting some bad moire problems, basically, between the initial drawing and trying to do the stuff over it. So, what if we try this? These will be our the corrugation. These will be the corrugations that hold up. Right? These will be the corrugations that are not rusty. On one particular panel. And lucky for this panel, by the time you get over here, the rust is almost entirely absent. Hmm. Hmm. I don't love this either. Hmm. Hmm. You know, none of these hatching techniques are striking me as the right thing. I think that I liked this the best. Out of all of these, I think that these two, this initial one actually seemed to work best. They just visually seem really the most interesting. So, let me try just starting fresh. Yeah, so the one thing that I always kind of worry about when I'm listening, when I put the free music archive on here, and we're listening to foreign language music, this in particular is in Spanish, maybe Portuguese, I think it's Spanish. Yeah, I think that's Spanish. Um, but I really hope that this isn't like a right wing ultra nationalist, um, you know, diatribe that's kind of underneath this podcast here. That would be really awkward. Um, oh. It's very important. Something about California, something about Argentina. Bolicero, that's somebody. I don't know. That might be very famous, and I don't know it. I don't quite speak enough Spanish. Boy Sarah, I think, is a recent figure. Alright, now I gotta Google it. Right, the president of Brazil. So yeah, I don't know. That seemed like it could be a contemporary accounting of something. Alright, I like this. I like this a lot. I think that this will work. Is this gonna work at this scale? Where are we going? We're going this big? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Um, cool. Alright. So, how did we end up here? This is actually kind of a mixture of the original material and trying to capture the original material in various different notational ways, different ways of using the pen and pen techniques to shade or not shade, to have kind of intersecting or colliding systems of producing the values that this rust makes when it interacts with the corrugations of this material. And what I kind of intuitively got to after trying all of these experiments over here is that I really like the way that this looks. I think that physically, as like a pen outcome, this best represents what I'm trying to capture about the material. And even though some of these are made with a sort of like, we were a little bit more accurate, like they convey something more accurately. I think overall, these convey kind of where we're going with the material. And so I think that this is a really nice test pattern. I think that this works out pretty well. This is kind of a hybrid. What I've done here is that it's got the same kind of straight lines, but then there's breaks in them to demonstrate that there's a lot of texture to the whole thing. But then in order to really capture that there are these big fields of rust, I have gone in with just very tight cross-hatching to convey those rust fields. Separate from and in conjunction with the kind of breaks in the vertical lines of the corrugation. Okay, well, great. I think we can just dive in. Right, oh, yeah, so this is abstracted from that original material, right? This is our easy visual conveyance for what this material is like. And so it won't be exactly like the original material, right? It will be our kind of cartoon interpretation of the original material. And that's okay, right? That's part of what this drawing technique is about. That's part of what I'm trying to achieve with these drawings, is to allow the viewer a very deep visual understanding of the material, and each piece of material that makes up these structures, but to use the great power of the pen, the power of iconography and graphic design and artistic drawing thoughts. To be able to convey a lot about kind of the real world use of these materials, just by capturing how they're structured, at this kind of cartoonish over-embellishment scale. You can also kind of see how see how these panels come together, because as we get to it, as you'll see, oh, interesting. So on this panel, on this panel here, at the bottom, the rust alleviates. I think because it must separate from the panel next to it, and so there's a little bit of like a rain shield where the panel just to the side of it has rolled up a little bit. So one thing that I can make sure to try to capture is that that next panel has, and I'll just go ahead and draw it right now, a slightly arched corner to account for the rust. So these bolts, they're definitely going to be in the valleys, right? The only way to attach this stuff is to kind of bolt valley to valley. You wouldn't bolt peak to the structural stuff behind it. That wouldn't be helpful because then the corrugation would just uncorrugate, and then you'd have other different problems. So they're definitely all in the valley, but that doesn't mean that this entire grid of bolts across the entire structure have all stuck around, that they were all installed. You know, there's all kinds of variation that is going to happen through the system and over the years. And so what I'm doing now is I'm kind of looking at the reference work, and I do have one of these panels in mind as the one that I am currently drawing. And, you know, when I do work like this, sometimes this seems like a sort of crazy thing to do, and it won't really show up on your guys' screen, but I'm taking a yellow post-it note and actually just sticking where the edge of this panel is, so that I make sure that I'm looking at the appropriate reference as I draw this rust. Right, and that is what makes this drawing kind of doable, is that I'm doing this one-to-one matching of each section with where it's going to go on my version, and I have kind of a plan and an understanding of how to do how to capture the different values that each section exhibits, you know, like what I want to capture about each section, and I have a strategy for how to capture that information, right, which is that we did that experimenting, and now we've given quite a lot of thought to the sort of system of vertical lines here that's capturing the main sort of corrugated nature of the material, and whether these lines are highlights or shadows, well, we only really get to work with added ink, you know, that's all we get. So you kind of gotta wing it sometimes. On this particular panel, which is here, there are some very dark sections of rust towards the bottom of the panel, but interestingly, there's also some sections where it gets significantly lighter towards the bottom of the panel, which is cool. Alright, so we are starting to run into a problem that I sometimes encounter, which is that this pen is starting to kind of really change some of its fundamental characteristics. I can see that the line quality is changing in a way that I don't have a whole lot of control over, and so the time might be at hand to really switch up. I might need to go grab a new pen, which will be interesting. So this bottom corner did not end up as light as it could have been. But in the spirit of leave it alone, I'm just gonna leave it alone. All right. You know, it's funny, now I wish that I could kind of show you guys both my physical screen and the digital sort of physical screen, because if I could, then what you guys would see is that I'm actually moving these post-it notes one at a time, which I think is really funny. Oh yeah, so another trick up here, one thing that I'm doing is I'm trying to be conscious of this material being a very wavy material. And so even though this is a straight line, as I'm drawing it, I'm trying to emphasize that there is a little bit of a value change every time that you pass by one of these guys, because they are corrugated. You know, that's real. That's an intense part of their nature. This is an odd one, this next set of panels, because the rust, what I'm drawing now actually is the rust first, and that seems a little counterintuitive, but on this particular one, the rust itself is very much shaped like the corrugations. It is a thick patina of rust. This whole panel is mostly brown. It only really lets up at the top here. The top right corner. Yeah, and then what's interesting here is that these are almost these little columns of rust that go up, but have these patches in between that are not rusty at all. Now I'm going back in with just the lightest of lines and doing the corrugation last. That one is certainly a messy one and a dark one, but I think it also is pretty reflective of what it's trying to capture. So, good. Let's press on. This part of the playlist certainly has kind of an old west guitar, electric guitar kind of vibe. Well, it's definitely not an old west guitar, right? Like it's a highly electric guitar, but I think that the mood that it's aiming for is certainly one of lone desert horse travel. Strange things seen under the moon, out on those lonesome nights, going across endless Wyoming scrubland. Or what have you. That felt a little bit less like cumbia and more like a jam band. I think that's also the nature of cumbia sometimes, is that it's got elements of sort of prog rock or psychedelic rock. It unfolds like a fractal, and stoners love that. Might also be that Free Music Archive is kind of messing with us, and that this is, um, hmm, you know, someone mislabeling their music. But it's got that underlying kind of hip-shaking beat, which is that drum beat underneath everything, which is absolutely the basis, right? The rhythm, the syncopation that drives the whole genre. Hey, jumping the gun. Most excellent. So how are we doing on bottom rust here? Yeah, it looks like this goes almost all the way to the far edge. Stops just one corrugation short. And goes all the way across. That continues for quite some time, and then we branch off into this large patch, and then this smaller silo going up, and then is there any more rust? No, there's just a hint on this side here. Throw in. I think I went too far here. I don't think I needed these little lines. How long have I been streaming? Wow. We are coming up on the 2-hour mark, folks. That's great. Right, well, we spent this whole second hour working on this, right? This was the last 45 minutes or so. And this is what? 1, 2.5. 2.5 square inches by, or well, 2.5 inches by, well, we'll round it out to 3 by 3. So 9 square inches in an hour. 9 square inches in an hour. Well, there's 60 minutes in an hour, and if you divide that out, you end up with well, what, 64 is, oh no, 72 is 9 times 81. 9 times 7 is 63. Right, yeah, okay, so we're doing like one of these every 7 minutes? Square inch every 7 minutes? That's, ooh, that's a little rough. But, well, I don't know, is it? It is what it is. I feel like this has been productive, and I don't think we really need to, like, call it quits at all. Well, we seem to have gotten to a contemplative, sort of, tune here that's just someone making occasional flute noises. I don't know how long we're going to sit with this one. I think there are some wind chimes in the background as well. That's the sound of a motorcyclist outside of my windows. Pittsburgh seems a little bit more active today than yesterday. I think that as news is coming out about what strategies are going to happen to reopen the economy and when that's going to settle in, people have decided to ease their burdens a little bit, to step out into the world a little bit, and I can't really blame them. I think after we're done here, I'm going to go on a nice walk, which, actually, yeah, it's almost 7 here, so I got an hour and 20 minutes left of daylight, something like that. I like to be home at 8. That's kind of the end of my day. I like to make a little ritual of it being 8 p.m. in my own way. I almost forgot to keep up with the rivets here. You know, it's funny, like, this wouldn't actually be riveted to anything, would it? I guess it would, right? Like, I guess if we were constructing this, there would actually be kind of a steel structure that you could see from the fern side. So maybe we'll draw that. Maybe we won't. I'll have to think about that. Maybe that'll be something that we draw in order to differentiate the kind of, like, faded version of this that's on this side from how it is over here. I think that would be good to kind of, it would clarify, I think. Wow, okay, that really didn't go. I can feel my attention starting to slip a little bit. I think that it may be time to kind of call it quits on the stream. How are we doing? Oh, right. Well, here, let me get the music back to not just hanging out in the jungle. Where am I at in these drawings? I am here. I'm over these middle windows. I'm drawing this very heavy section in the center here that's like all rust and weathering. here, I know that this entire page is going to end up being, or not this entire page, but this entire long rectangle is going to end up being shaded. So the way that I can convey interest is by just doing little line breaks. Quite a number of them on this left side where there's just a hint of a relaxation, and a kind of overwhelming amount of rust. But just a hint, kind of here and here. Ooh. I'm liking how this is coming out. I think this is coming out pretty cool. Oh. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go for a walk. I think I might be done with the stream for the night. I don't think I'm done with this drawing, but I think that you guys understand. I think that yeah, that should make it pretty clear what we've done, you know? So we've made these vertical lines. Those are representative of the corrugations. Diagonal lines are the patches of rust. And the dots that go across are the rivets that produce that. Very cool. So I'm just going to continue that. You know, honestly, like, what I could do at this stage is just, like, scan it now and make a double of this side over here, and no one would be the wiser except us here on the stream. But I'm not going to roll that way. I do want to actually finish this out, though it's obviously going to be another hour of work to do this over here after we did our hour of sort of warm-up and learning about how to get this done. So I'm going to go ahead and go for a walk while the walking's good, get that daylight while that daylight's still available. Our bodies don't produce vitamin D unless we get access to sunlight, so it's either this or big horse pills of vitamin D. And I think I'd rather walk around outside than have a giant horse pill of vitamin D. So, yeah, I'm going to sign off. We're going to see each other again here on this wonderful Pittsburgh Papercraft stream tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's Sunday, the 19th, April 19th, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Sounds good. I think that this was a really successful set of drawings, and I am pleased about it. I'm tired. I think my mouth hurts from talking. Anyway, thanks everybody for listening and for hanging out with me. Maybe in the future, this live chat will actually have some chat in it. That'll be incredible. Who could know? Alright, well, have a great night, and stay safe, stay healthy, be well, and have fun.